Hello, community, and welcome back to another Keeping It Real with Dr. Nita podcast. I am your host, Dr. Nita Wilson, C-Suite Trusted Advisor, Elite Team Strategist, and Board Director, preparing businesses to navigate culture, complexity, and change. Well, it's October, and usually around this time of the year, in alignment with Halloween, I host a panel of C-suite leaders from a variety of industries to talk about what's scary when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But this year, what scares me most aren't the typical DEI challenges. It's the inflammatory conversations happening around the upcoming elections. The heightened tensions and division can make it feel like any conversation could ignite a raging argument, risking relationships we care about. That's why this month's series that offers 4 practical tips for discussing hot topics without torching relationships is so important. Addressing hot topics while preserving relationships is such a valuable skill set, especially right now. If you've ever heard the phrase disagreeing without being disagreeable, then you'll appreciate that my goal with this series is to share insights and simple, practical strategies to help navigate challenging conversations with grace so we can all keep our relationships intact, even when the topics get heated. Let's start with tip number 1, avoiding volatility by valuing the relationship. If you truly value a relationship, sometimes it's best to forego discussing hot topics altogether. Think about conversations surrounding politics, diversity, or any other issue that can quickly become heated. Are these conversations worth sacrificing your bond with the person on the other side of the table? Hopefully, the answer is often no. When we prioritize the relationship, we can make a conscious decision to hold back, not because we don't care about the issue, but because we care more about maintaining mutual respect. This brings me to my ACT model. Approach others with an open heart. Connect to understand and tap into different perspectives by being genuinely curious. How we approach challenging conversations can make all the difference. Are you approaching your discussion partner with curiosity, or are you being accusatory? Are you focused on connecting with the other person or proving a point? When you can tap into diverse ways of thinking, you open yourself up to a wider understanding without creating unnecessary volatility. Your overarching goal should be valuing the relationship and knowing what's important in any given moment. Not every conversation needs to be had, and not every disagreement needs to be solved immediately. Remember this. Your response is your responsibility. You always have the power to choose how you respond. And sometimes the most powerful choice you can make is to respectfully and graciously disengage for the sake of the relationship. Exercising your power of choice to disengage is not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. This brings me to tip number 2, delivering a message that is received versus delivering a message that is right. Here's a hard truth. You might have all your ducks and data points lined up in a row and still not get your point across if the person you're speaking with isn't in a place to receive your message emotionally, psychologically, or factually. You've probably heard the phrase, meet people where they are, and that's exactly what I mean here. If someone is not ready to hear your message, pushing it on them can result in frustration for both parties. Instead, take a reflective rather than reactive approach. Ask yourself, am I focusing on being right, or am I focusing on having my message received? It's not about winning. It's about mutual understanding. To that end, let people have their own experiences. Newsflash, you don't have to agree with them and they don't have to agree with you to have a successful exchange of ideas. What's more important is that you create an atmosphere of discussion, not debate. When you're in a discussion, you can share your views and be curious about the others without the pressure of winning. Curiosity opens the door to learning, which is far more valuable than being perceived as being right or wrong. It's also important to distinguish between aggravation and aggression. Sometimes conversations can be frustrating, but that doesn't mean they have to become confrontational. Stay calm and stay focused on the goal, understanding. Isn't that liberating? Tip number 3 stresses the importance of managing intent and impact. Even the most well-meaning people can get tripped up in failing to manage intent and impact. You may intend to have a thoughtful discussion, but if your timing or tone is misaligned, the impact could be entirely different. Your discussion partner might feel like you're dismissing their concerns, distracting from the real issue, or even trying to draw them into a frustrating debate. None of these outcomes lead to meaningful dialogue. So here's a suggestion. Be thoughtful about appropriateness by considering the places, spaces, and faces that are part of the conversation. While the timing of a discussion is important, asking yourself if this is the right place to have a discussion is crucial. Is the setting or space conducive to a productive conversation? Is the person or face you're talking to in the right frame of mind? Being conscious of these factors, places, spaces, and faces, can significantly shape the impact of your words. And it's important to always be honest with yourself about your intention before starting a conversation. Do you want to genuinely engage in a thoughtful discussion? Or are you leaning towards dismissing someone else's perspective or distracting from the real issue? Knowing this up front will help guide the conversation. Also, be aware of and own your triggers. You probably already know which words or topics may cause you to react emotionally, which can derail your efforts. Take a moment to check in with yourself before engaging in a potentially inflammatory discussion. If you're not in the right headspace, it's okay to postpone the conversation until you are. Remember tip number 1, deciding not to have the conversation to begin with is always an option, rather than taking the risk of discussing hot topics that may torch relationships. Finally, with tip number 4, let me encourage you to consider reframing the discussion before you even start the dialogue. When talking about reframing the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging discussion from difficult to different, here's a construct I like to use. Diversity is a fact, equity is a choice, inclusion is an action, and belonging is the outcome. Each of these elements requires a distinct approach, and none of them happen by accident. When engaging in these conversations, remember that the goal might not always be to reach agreement, but rather to raise awareness. Sometimes it's about planting seeds of thought that will grow over time. And don't forget the work you need to do to ensure you're achieving your discussion goals. Self-reflection is a strategy for navigating complex conversations. It's important to recognize that people often resist discussions about diversity, equity, and inclusion because they may feel threatened either by the discomfort of facing hard truths or by a perceived loss of power. As you navigate these conversations, remind yourself of the bigger picture. What's the goal here? Are you trying to win an argument, or are you trying to raise awareness and inspire change? Well, that was a lot, but take heart. Implementing a more proactive approach with just one of the 4 tips I've offered to discuss hot topics without torching relationships can start with a 30-day simple action plan. What will you start doing? What will you stop doing? What will you do more of, and what will you do less of? Small, consistent actions can lead to big, lasting changes. Thanks for joining me to explore 4 tips for discussing hot topics without torching relationships. As a quick review, tip number 1 suggests avoiding volatility by valuing the relationship. Tip number 2 advises delivering a message that is received versus delivering a message that you feel is right. Tip number 3 encourages managing the intent of your words with the impact your words may have on others. And tip number 4 recommends reframing the discussion before starting the dialogue. Most importantly, your 30-day action plan is doable. because you only need to try one action consistently over 30 days. Again, what will you stop or start or do more of or do less of to help you discuss hot topics without torching relationships? This month on Real Conversations from the C-Suite, I'll be joined by my dear friend and colleague, Ms. Terri Wilson, founder and CEO of Doing HR Differently. We're going to take a deep dive into each of the 4 tips I've just shared. For instance, beyond whether or not to discuss hot topics, we'll unpack the value of always being mindful that it's not just about what we say, but how we say it. And that when approaching hot topics with care, we have the power to turn potentially contentious conversations into optimistic opportunities for deeper dialogue if we stay thoughtful, stay kind, and most importantly, stay focused on valuing the relationship above all else. If this podcast was helpful to you, please share it with your network by reposting and adding your own comments. Our community is a learning community, and I value your voice. In the meantime, please stay in the flow with me by following, liking, and oversharing any podcast that helps you reframe hot topic conversations from difficult to different. Until next time, this is Dr. Anita reminding you to stay blessed and keep it real.